This is going to be hard to say, but sometimes I feel like it's just better to say hard things and get it out there. So I won at poker. Let's rewind a second. That's me, Marc Goone.
Wow.
And I've got good news and bad news. Good news, after a brutal stretch dealing with the gods of variance, we finally booked a winning session. Bad news, I'm still well off the pace of making $100 an hour, and we've got under 35 hours to try to get there. In this episode, I played 2 sessions at my favorite card room in the world, Hustler Casino, and I tried to run up a big boy stack to get back on track. This is the second to last episode of the Low Stakes Challenge, so we need to make things happen now. Can I win $100 an hour playing low stakes poker?
Down bad, bounce back, boy, I'm different. Watch how I handle my business. Watch with the hands not ticking. Listen, that's that drum kick, boom, coming out of my system.
All right, guys, jumping into the first session of the week here at Hustler, the hourly has plummeted under 60, so we got to turn things around, and we need to turn them around fast. Very first hand of the day, under the gun just open jams for 125. We've got JJ Reddix here in the cutoff, and we are going to call. Don't really see a reason to raise. Like if someone wakes up behind with a hand like aces or kings or something like that, no reason to commit our stack here. We just expect everybody else to pretty much fold. So we are going to call, but now the button is going to move all in for 345. Well, this is not that much more, and since he's short stack, can definitely be doing this with worse. So we are going to call 3 ways all into a flop. King Jack 8, pretty good for us with a couple of hearts. The turn's a 9 of hearts. Okay, not the best. The river is a 5 of hearts. Under the gun shows ace king, and the button is actually going to win here with pocket 4s with a heart. And once again, we are not off to an ideal start. Next hand here, double board PLO bomb pot. I've seen a ton of comments from people saying, you know what, maybe you shouldn't count the double board or just count the no limit. And it's absolutely ridiculous. Let me just real quickly, let me talk about why it's ridiculous. Because if I didn't count the double board, well, the double board PLO bomb pots take up so much time every 40 minutes that I'm really playing like 8 to 10 less no limit hold'em hands per hour. So if I'm not counting the double board, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna like multiply my no limit win rate by like 1.5 or something? Because I would see 1.5 times. It's ridiculous. There's no way to filter it out. If we didn't have double boards, we'd have much more no limit, and my win rate would just be higher in no limit. So let's cut this out. So board 1 is going to come ace 7 6 with a couple of clubs, and board 2 is going to come queen jack 5. So we flop a queen high flush draw and 3 pair on the second board here. So essentially like kind of flopping a set. We got a lot of outs to boat up, I guess. Checks over to us. We're going to go 200 here in the low jack. Hijack's going to call heads up to a turn, which is an ace of hearts up top and a 7 of hearts down below. Pretty much the worst cards we could see on both boards. So we're going to check, but thankfully he checks it back. River is a deuce up top and a jack down below. So we've got nothing on the top board, but we have the nut full house on board deuce. So we are just going to pot here and try to get him to fold out any equity that he has on the top board because we just got nothing going on there. So we go 600. Thankfully he's going to fold and we take it down. All right, next hand here, we open queen 10 from the cutoff. Button's going to call heads up to a flop, queen 9 3. I'm just checking here. I have started to deviate. Now we'll just bet thick value hands. Like if I had king, queen, or ace, queen here, I'd probably just bet. This hand, I think a little in between thin value. So I am going to check. He checks it back. Turn is a 4 of hearts. Just going to start betting here for value. There's a lot of draws out there now. Backdoor, flush draw. So I go 50 here just under pot. He puts in a quick call. River's a 10 of diamonds, making us 2 pair here now at this point. And I do think he could possibly have some hands like 10-9 that now make 2 pair. The backdoor flush draw missed. He could also maybe have some hands like king 10 or jack 10 that check back the flop. Just don't think those hands are folding. So I'm gonna go relatively big here on this river. I'm gonna overbet. I go 225.
Punish me, sweet boy.
He puts in the call and we are good. All right, next hand here. Low jack raises to 20, cutoff calls, small blind calls. We're in the big blind with king jack. We're coming along. Flop is jack 9 deuce. What do you know? Flop comes jack 9 deuce. Flop comes jack 9 deuce. What do you know? 200 big blinds effective. Flop comes jack 9 deuce. It's going to come jack 9 deuce. Look at that sweet baby there. So we see a flop here, jack 9 deuce. We have pocket 9s. Flop comes jack 9 deuce. What do you know? Look at that sweet baby there. Go to a flop, jack 9 deuce. What do you know? Flop comes jack 9 deuce. Jack 9 deuce with a couple of spades. Very special flop. A very special flop in my heart. Look at that sweet baby there. It checks all the way through. The turn now is a 7, and the small blind leads for $25, just 1/3 pot here. Don't think this is a strong hand a lot of the time. We got top pair second kicker, so I think we can just raise for value right here. Try to get value from his draws, his 9x, his worst jack x, etc. We raise to 115, folds back around to the small blind who calls, heads up to a river, which is a 5 of clubs. And at this point when he checks it over, I think we're gonna have to go relatively small here to get value from hands like 9x. We look pretty strong when we've raised the turn and then we bet the river again. I'm just gonna target the 9x type holdings here that might get sticky when the front door flush draw bricks. So I go very small here on the river. I go 75. We show our hand expecting to be good all the time. And look at this, look at this, look at this. We get slow rolled. He shows pocket 9s, all good, small pot. This guy's, he's a good dude. And he's just messing around. Stings a little bit because we've been losing so much, but we can take the slow roll. Next hand here, low jack opens to 25. He's a solid reg, and I'm gonna be doing a lot of flatting here. Don't really have a ton of incentive to 3-bet, with the rest of the table being recreational players. I'm gonna be 3-betting very, very polar here from a low jack open. Maybe just aces, kings, ace, king suited, and possibly queens, and then some bluffs like my worst king X, my worst ace X, my suited connectors. So gonna be doing a lot of flatting here. Very little 3-betting when a reg opens, the rest of the table's Rex. I call with ace jack in the cutoff. Flop comes 8-7-3. And he checks it over, and I elect to go $20 here, just betting small, trying to get called by his ace highs, his pocket 6s, his 7x, stuff like that. Then we can get that stuff to fold on the turn. He puts in a call. Turn is now a 10 of diamonds, and when he checks it over, I actually elect to overbet on the turn, which as soon as I did it, I didn't really like it because I think maybe a solid rake here on this flop could just be checking his entire range to me, especially because my reputation is starting to be a little bit of a punter. I go 150, don't love it. He calls. River's now a king of hearts. And at this point, I realized my mistake on the previous street that our opponent was uncapped. You know, he could have some sets, he could have some 2-pair, he could have some very strong hands if he's checking his range to me on the flop. And then I overbet on the turn, he's probably just not gonna have any raises. So I actually elect to check this back, figuring maybe with my ace jack high, I'm sometimes good against flush draws, and I don't want to compound my mistake on the previous street. So I check it back, and he actually shows ace high. I believe he has ace 4 of spades or ace 6 of spades. Can't see exactly what he had, but he had ace x of spades, and we actually are going to win the maximum here. I blendered this hand hard, right? I blendered this hand hard. I think the adjustment in this hand, if this guy is checking range on boards like this, would just be probably to play a big bet or check strategy on the flop with a ton of checks. I should just be checking back a ton here on this flop, but misplayed this one, but got a little bit lucky. Hello.
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 Do you know your song is the introduction to every vlog that's been going for the last 3 months?
Down bad, bounce back, boy, I'm different.
You did tell me that.
You're gonna file a DMCA?
Only when you get to your peak success, and then I can get the most money back.
What do you think of this?
Ooh, you got a little vibe going. Hold on.
Wow.
Noticeable difference.
A big difference. Let me ask you, do you think $100 an hour is possible at 5-5?
I think if you're playing, then it is. I've seen you play 4 hands online at the same time, like a fucking robot.
As someone who made an album known as Casino, it's there on your shirt. Do you think Marc Goone playing poker was an influence on you making a gambling-related album?
Man, you know, I wouldn't give him any monetary credit, but I would say that living with a guy who does nothing but play and think about poker for like 6 years probably did have an influence.
Do you have anything to say to the poker community before we wrap this up?
The Celtics are as good without Jason Tatum as they are with him.
And they need to know that.
It's important. I don't have anything to say to the poker community other than, as a guy who doesn't know much about poker, you probably think you know more about poker than you actually know about poker.
Ooh, that's a really good point, because I've never met a community who thinks they know so many things.
It's something we all do. We all reach out to the people who are at the top of their industry and tell them how they should do their job.
That's what the internet's for.
That's what the internet's for. We're just helping. Honestly, it's constructive criticism.
All right, next hand here. LoJack, Mr. Charlie Wilmoth is going to open to $20, and we call in the big blind with ace queen offsuit. We'll be 3-betting ace queen suited here. We're gonna be really, really tight with my 3-bets, and actually probably gonna be relatively polar. So flop comes 9-5-3 with a couple of clubs. We check, he goes $20. We have 2 overs with the ace of clubs, so we are going to put in a call. Turn is now a jack of clubs, and when we check, Charlie he's using our strategy against us here. He goes small here on this flush completing turn, which obviously you guys know I like. And now I'm considering between calling and check raising on this turn. If I do call, the plan is probably going to be to check raise jam rivers quite a bit here, but I'm also considering just raising right now, check raising the turn and then jamming the river. Because it is Charlie, I'm getting into a little bit of this he knows I know, he knows I know kind of thing here, and Charlie knows that I really only check raise turns as a bluff. So I actually elect to just call here with the plan to check raise the river with the ace of clubs if I don't get there. So now the river is a king of diamonds. I check it over, and now Charlie overbets. He goes 175, and at this point the plan was to check raise the river, and now I'm starting to chicken out a little bit because he opened from the LoJack, which is a tight range. The flush got there on the turn. The river brings in a lot of the obvious backdoor straight draws now that may continue barreling on the turn, and I just think in this spot he's probably under bluffing. If he was in a cutoff or button, I'd feel really, really good about check jamming this river, but from a LoJack open, like what really is he bluffing with here? I am not sure. I chicken out here. I think he's just gonna have a lot of flushes and straights, and I just don't think he's gonna fold those to me with my crackhead image. So I actually elect to fold, and Charlie shows a little red baby card. So actually he was bluffing. He got us good. Congrats, Charlie. All right, next hand here. EP opens to 20. We're in the cutoff with ace queen of spades. We 3-bet 270, and now the EP player calls, and we say,
I want you to punish me so hard.
What's that?
I want you to punish me so hard.
Okay.
flop comes 3 low cards. Who knows? I forgot what it was. He checks it over. We go $50. He folds. He could not punish us this hand. All right, next one here. This one is a doozy, I promise. We open ace-7 of hearts under the gun. Cutoff makes it 70. We start this hand relatively deep, about 1,000 effective, so I make a speculative call here out of position. Flop comes 9-7 deuce. I check it over. Surprisingly, he checks it back. Now the turn is a 4 of spades. I think a big mistake here on this turn would just be coming out and leading, because his range when he 3-bets and then checks back the flop is going to be one of 2 hand categories. It's either going to be a hand like ace king or ace queen, which we have drawing very, very thin. We would love for that hand to stick around and either try to bluff on the turn, or we can just value bet against that hand on the river if it checks back. Or, I mean, like if that hand hits an ace, like it's cooler city, right? We have 2 pair. So no reason to bet here against those types of hands. And if he does occasionally have a hand that like pocket aces or pocket kings that check back because the board was so dry, well, just coming out and monkey betting here doesn't really accomplish much against that either, does it? So I check here and he checks it back again. At this point, we can rule out aces and kings, probably just going to be ace king and ace queen. River now is a king. He goes 100 here. And now the question is, if we did get here with a strong hand, like king 9 suited, right? King 9 suited may play this way some of the time. I think the best hand he has here is ace king, and I don't think ace king is going to want to play for all of the money. Now, neither here nor there. If I had king 9 suited on this river, I'd probably just be leading for like 400, like 2.5x, 3x pot on this river, because I don't think ace king's ever folding to a huge lead. But neither here nor there. The point is, I would not check raise jam with king 9 suited because I don't think ace king is calling. So since I don't think ace king is calling, that means it's probably a pretty good spot to bluff, right? So I put all of the chips into the middle. I check raise all in for about 900 total here. Cut off tanks and tanks and tanks, and finally folds. And this game's been so nitty. I don't like to show the bluffs. I don't show the bluffs, but this game kind of needs it. So I show the ace of hearts, and now he asked me if I had aces. Yes, that's what I had. I had aces, sir. All right, guys, pretty good session. We didn't lose a lot. Lost like $14 or something like that, which compared to how things have been going the last few weeks is pretty good. So you know what? Maybe today is the day. We're gonna turn things around. I feel it in my septum. What's a septum? It's a good word, isn't it? Septum. Anyway, Adam will put the results over here or something on the way into Hustler right now for the second session of the week. Gonna try to turn things around get back on track. Gonna fill up, get some gas right now. I don't know why I always get gas when I'm driving to Hustler. Probably because Hustler is the only place I ever drive to. I don't leave the house that much. So gonna get some gas, head into Hustler, and then win some money today. We'll see you guys on the other side. All right, jumping into the next session here, and just sometimes just poker goes this way. I believe I've lost like 6 of the last 7 sessions. Actually, probably the biggest downswing I've ever been on at the $5 blind level. I think it's close to 6,000 or something at this point. Never really gone on a downswing greater than 5K, but with the double word PLO bomb pots, the game does play a little bit bigger than when I played this game full time in 2017. So reasonable, I guess. The hijack raises to 15. We call on the button with queen 10. Usually just gonna play a 3-better fold strategy, but we'll work in some calls on the button, especially when the blinds are recreational players. So we're gonna call on the button here. Big blind calls as well. 3 ways to a flop. Queen 7 deuce. Big blind checks. Hijack the preflop razor checks, and we're gonna bet here for value. We go $20, and both players call. Turn is now a 6 of diamonds. Now there's spades and diamonds out there. And when it checks over to us, I think this is close between checking and betting. But even though this board is wet and there's a couple flush draws out there, I do think it may be a little thin here. One of my favorite lines in poker, you guys know, c-bet the flop, check back the turn, and then bluff catch the river. Works especially well on these wet boards. So I actually check this back. If I had queen jack or queen king, I would always bet here. River's now a queen of diamonds, bringing in the backdoor flush and giving us trips. Now the big blind comes out and bets 50, and the hijack calls. When the big blind chooses this size, recreational players don't really care about the backdoor flush, right? They care much more about the front door flush. Sometimes they don't even see the backdoor flush. When he comes out and bets $50, I would just expect if he had a hand like ace queen or king queen or queen jack on this river to just choose a bigger size, right? And when the hijack overcalls, well, I would expect maybe the big blind is just bluffing here a lot of the time, and the hijack probably has a hand like pocket jacks or pocket 10s or something like that, pocket 9s. So I'm just gonna put in a raise here. I don't think we can go huge because we would love for a hand like pocket 10s to call here from the hijack. So I raise very small to 130, but unfortunately for us, both players fold, and someone else at the table says,
Take a picture. He likes that bluff.
Next hand here, straddle is on. We raise to 35 in the cutoff with pocket 9s. And the under the gun straddler calls, heads up to a flop, jack 9-5. Okay, we can work with that. Checks to us. We're gonna choose a small size where he raises off his strong stuff, calls with his weak stuff, 35. And he's just going to call. Turn is now a jack of spades. At this point, the board is wet. Top card has paired. I would love to choose a size where he continues with his flush draws and straight draws that we have drawing dead here. I go small here on this turn. I go $50. But unfortunately for us, he is just going to fold. And even when we catch a break, it seems like we just can't catch a break. All right, next hand here. Pretty happy with how I played this one. Process over results. Let's talk about it. We go 20 in the low jack with 6-5 of spades, just opening to a smaller size because the table has been kind of tight. And actually there's been quite a lot of 3-bets, just been getting 3-bet a lot when I open. So choosing a smaller size. I go 20, big blind calls, heads up to a flop, king, jack 9. He checks it over. I'm just c-betting my entire range here for small size. I go 20 and he puts in the call. Turn is now an ace of clubs. He checks, and at this point I think he's relatively capped. Okay, I guess he could have queen 10 that's slow played on the flop some of the time, but I think most of his straights would just raise off. I do think he's going to have a lot on this turn of pair plus straight draws, hands like jack 10, 10-9, king 10, ace 10. I also think he could have some 2-pair here now, hands like ace 9, ace jack, stuff like that, but I don't think the 2-pair portion of his range is going to want to play a monster pot, particularly on this board where we can have all the ace king, the kings, the aces, you know, they just always put you on ace king. So I'm gonna go big here, not all that concerned with him having strong hands. I go 130, he puts in the call. River's now a jack of hearts. Don't particularly love this card because now a lot of his weaker hands like jack 10 make trips. Ace jack now makes a boat. Do think we can run into some brick walls here. So on this river, we've got 6 high. I'm not giving up, but I think it's a pretty bad spot to bluff large overall because I do think he can have some trips and full houses here on this river. So the plan here is just to get hands like king 10, 9, 10, king 9, a counterfeit 2-pair. I just want all of those weak hands that got to this river to fold. And if we can get some of that stuff to fold, that is a print for us on this river with 6 high. No reason to go huge to do that because we can just run into some monster hands. So all the people saying, well, you just always bluff big and you always value bet small. That is not true. My sizes are based upon their range. His range on this river is very strong. in my opinion. So that means my bluffs are probably gonna wanna go small and my value's probably gonna wanna go with the monster sizes. So I go very small, I go 115. Unfortunately for us, we just ran into it, which is what's gonna happen on this river a lot of the time. He check raises to 530, so probably just has a boat, something like ace jack on this river a lot of the time. And obviously we just fold, we are done with it. All right, next hand here, and I talked about how often I was getting 3-bet, and I had mentioned to one of the other players at the table, I think like my last like 4 or 5 opens, I had gotten 3-bet and had just folded. So in this one, under the gun limps, we ISO to $30 with pocket 7s. The hijack calls. Now the cutoff 3-bets to 125. Just feels like every time we open, we're getting 3-bet. And look at this, now the button 4-bets to 345. So I don't know what's going on. Ends up in this hand, heads up all in between the cutoff and the button, and the cutoff, I believe, has pocket queens and button has pocket 8s. So they actually have real hands, but you go through these patches where you just feel like every time you open, you're getting 3-bet. Every time you smack a board, you don't get paid. Every time you whiff, you just run into the top of their range. And I'm going through it at this point, trying to stay level-headed, but I just want to show you guys, sometimes poker is like this. Sometimes this is just how it goes for 6 or 7 or 10 sessions. There is a lot of variance when you're seeing, 20 hands an hour, especially because we got those double board bomb pots, which slows down the game, which means we play less no limit, right? So just wanted to show that not everything is flowers and roses and puddles of joy. Sometimes you gotta get through the mud to get to the rainbows and beautiful popsicles on the other side. All right, next hand here, under the gun opens to 25. And this is a relatively tight player, used a large open size from under the gun. Button calls, and I am in the small blind here with pocket 10s. I think it's very, very close between a squeeze and a call. Now, if he had opened from the cutoff or button, obviously just slam dunk squeeze, even with like pocket 7s or pocket 8s, whatever. But an under the gun open to 5x, I think it could go either way. I think it's close. Maybe I'm seeing monsters under the bed here a little bit, but I just call 3 ways to a flop, which is okay for us. 10, 9, 7. So we flop top set here. Check it over to the pre-flop raiser. Unfortunately, he checks, and now the button checks it back. No. Turn is now a king of spades. Okay, and at this point, I think the under the gun player could have just, a lot of ace king, king queen suited, stuff like that. Or maybe even like ace queen that'll just take a stab on this board. So I check again. Now the under the gun player checks, and now the button checks back again. This is a disaster. River is a 7. At this point, I don't think either player has a particularly strong hand. So I'm just gonna come out and bet small here, trying to get called by a hand like 9x, pocket 8s, pocket 6s, something like that. I go 25. Under the gun calls, which is okay. Now the button goes 125. This just feels like the button has a 7 all of the time. I'm not a big fan of trying to make recreational players fold trips, especially when we have not told them twice during the hand that their hand is no good. Like if I was bluffing here on this river, I don't think I would bet 3-bet bluff on this river, because I just don't think we're deep enough to get a hand like ace-7 to fold or something like that. So he's only got about 650 behind. So I just put the money in. Unfortunately for us, under the gun folds and button folds very quickly, and he says he was bluffing. All right, next hand here, under the gun opens to 20, recreational player. We 3-bet 270 in the hijack with pocket 10s. And now the cutoff is going to cold call, and the under the gun player comes along as well. Okay, so 3 ways to a flop. Ace 10 5. This could not be going any better. We flop middle set here on a wet board. Under the gun checks. I go 100 with only one player in position to us. I think if the player behind us cold called with a hand like ace queen or ace king, obviously that hand's just never folding here. So let's start getting value. We don't want this to check through. The player in position to us has a hand like queens or jacks or something like that. So we go 100, cutoff folds. Now the under the gun player calls. It's all right. We think the under the gun player just has a lot of ace X here. We go to a turn which is a 5 of diamonds. So we make a full house here. When the under the gun player checks, I think this is interesting. Obviously he could have ace X of clubs that I just don't think is folding for any size, right? But I would also like for hands like ace jack of hearts or something like that that don't have a club to stick around here. So I am actually going to go relatively small here, trying to entice him to just continue with all of his ace X hands, all of his just like small club flush draws that we have drawing dead here. I go 225. He is going to tank and tank and tank. And finally, he's gonna fold. It just, I'm feeling, I'm days removed from this session doing the voiceover now, and it's like I'm back in there. I'm just like feeling the frustration, right? It can't go both ways, right? It can't just be like, well, they just always call because I bluff a lot. My image is of a guy who's just crazy and spewy, but every time I have it, they fold, and it's just Sometimes it's just that's what it feels like in the moment, and we move on. All right, next hand here, just a little more complaining. Bear with me, and then I'm done complaining forever. I promise. We open to 25 with King Jack. The low jack, hijack, and small blind call. Big blind squeezes now to 125, and obviously we're just bottom of range here from early position. We're just getting 3-bet every time we open for some reason. We fold, low jack folds. Anyway, this hand ends up going to showdown. I just want to tell you guys what the big blind had here when he squeezed. He had 4-9 suited. 4-9 suited. What is happening? What is going on? I'm a little bit, I'm just at a loss here. All right, next hand here. Under the gun goes 25. The hijack calls. We're on the button with pocket 2s. Obviously, you just don't want to squeeze with this hand. We want to be going linear when there's an open and a call, just using good, better, and best. This hand doesn't fall into that category, but we can call with some hands on the button here. Small blind and big blind come along 5 ways to a flop. King 4 deuce. We flop another set. Will this be the time we get paid? Well, it checks all the way around to us on the button, which isn't a good sign because this means that the under the gun player or the hijack probably just don't have very strong hands. Although the small blind or big blind could still have a pretty good hand on this board because they just naturally check to the preflop raiser. I go 50 here into 120. Now the small blind and big blind both call. So pretty good for us. 3 ways to a turn, which is the king of spades. This is amazing. One of these guys has to have a king, right? Now both of them check it over to us. And again, I want to choose the size on this turn if possible, where a flush draw is just always going to call. We have the flush draws drawing dead. And if one of these guys does have a hand like king queen or king jack, we want to choose a size where maybe they'll just put in more money themselves here. So if we can choose a size where all 3 of these things happen, where they will raise off their king X, they will call with their flush draws, and they'll also call here if they just have a hand like pocket 9s or something, because we'll give them a good price. So I go 80. Unfortunately, the small blind folds, but the big blind does call here. Now the river is a 6 of clubs, and when he checks it over at this point, there's 2 options here on this river, right? His range is 3 parts again. It could be some weak king X, some trips that didn't raise the turn. Hands like king 9 suited, king 8 suited, whatever. It could be some busted flush draws, but we're not getting anything from that. Or it could just be some middling hands like pocket 8s or pocket 7s or something like that. The option here on this river is to go with maybe a medium size to target like the pocket 8s, or just go for gold against the king X that didn't raise the turn. And that's gonna be the option I go with here, because I do think the big blind closing the action could just have a ton of like king 3 suited, king 5 suited, king 7 suited, king 8 suited, right? And those hands wouldn't necessarily raise the turn, even if I bet small. Now, if I was bluffing in this spot and he flipped over a king, well, I wouldn't try to make that hand fold here in a million years, right? He's got trips. That's a very strong hand to a rec player. The flush draw has bricked. Rec players don't like folding strong hands when the flush draw bricks. I go 800 into 590, and he starts tanking. This feels pretty good. I'm just gonna shut my mouth, and he's gonna put in more money at some point, right? Someone's gonna call me. This guy's never folding a king, and now he folds. And he says he almost called me with not a good hand. So probably just ran into a hand like pocket 7s or something like that here on this river. Just a little unfortunate that he doesn't have the king in his hand, and once again, we do not get paid. All right, next hand here, EP limps. We ISO to 35 and hijack with pocket quigglies. The button is going to call. Now the EP player is going to limp raise to 120. I already don't love to see this because when players limp raise, it's usually just going to be hands like kings and aces. But this guy does limp raise quite a bit. So thinking maybe he does this a little bit wider, and queens is a pretty good hand. So we're going to call. We're in there. That's going to bring along the button 3 ways, kind of sandwiched in the middle here. Not the best spot for us. And the flop comes ace, king, 7. So we're obviously just done with this. But now the EP player checks. We are going to check. The button checks it back. Turn is a 4 of diamonds. Now it checks through again. River is a 5 of spades. And when it checks to us again, obviously our hand just too thin to bet for value. If we had a hand like king queen here or king jack, we'd just always bet. But I think this is a little bit too thin. But I do think if it checks through, we do have showdown value here, just a little bit too thin to go for value. So we check. And now fortunately the button checks back, and the EP player shows pocket 10s, and we are good with pocket queens. The button mucks, and feels pretty good on a ace king high flop in a 3-bet pot to take it down with pocket queens. All right, next hand here. This is just print. This is just print. My favorite spot to bluff in live poker. So we open on the button at 25 because there's 2 wrecks in the blind. Small blind calls, heads up to a flop 10-5-3 with a couple spades. He checks. We're gonna choose a size that entices him to raise off a strong shit call with his weak shit. About half pot. We go 25, and he snap calls. And a little tidbit. When they snap call, we can just eliminate the 5s and the 3s. Pure. They at least think about it. So he is now insanely capped if the turn is a blank, but a blank is not the turn. The turn is a 3 of spades, bringing in the front door flush. When he checks it over at this point, again, we're going to choose the size now to entice him to raise his flushes and continue with a bunch of his weak hands. So we go 40. He puts in a quick call again. River's now an ace of clubs, and when he checks at this point, I ask him how much he will call.
How much will you call? You'll call 175? Well, I haven't bet yet.
Do that. 175.
No, I can't do that. 280.
175. There's only $100 here.
I'm greedy. I'm really greedy.
So I go 280 and he flips over pocket deuces and folds. So it just shows here, using the small size on the flop makes them continue with their weak shit. Using the small size on the turn, again, makes them continue with their weak shit. And then you can just blast them off a lot of that stuff on the river. All right, next hand here. We're gonna use this one liberally because we haven't got to use it in a while. Big pot alert. All right, we've got king 10 of hearts in the cutoff. The low jack limps and hijack ISOs 230. Normally, you guys know I'm a big fan of 3-betting to get pots heads up in position against Rex, but when they ISO 230, especially from a player who has a limp range, it's just gonna be a very strong range. I don't think king 10 suited plays amazing against that range in a 3-bet pot, so I'm just gonna call here and deviate. The big blind calls, and now the low jack limper comes along as well. 4 ways to a flop, jack 9, 6, and it's going to check all the way around to us on the button. We do have a gutter to the nuts here and a backdoor heart draw as well, so I'm gonna start bluffing. I think it's a pretty good spot to start bluffing, but I want to choose a small size because the big blind and the low jack limper are both uncapped because they both naturally check to the pre-flop raiser with all their hands usually. So I go 40 here. Now the big blind calls next to act, low jack calls second to act, and the hijack, the original pre-flop raiser, calls as well. Uh-oh. Now the turn is a jack of spades. At this point, checks over to us on the button again, and I'm just pretty much done with this. I think it's very, very, very likely at least one of these players has a jack here, and getting players to fold trips at low stakes not going to work out well for us if we try to bluff here. So I just check this back, and the river now a queen of spades. Look at that sweet baby there. So we make the king high straight, big blind checks, low jack goes 80, and the hijack folds. And at this point, yes, there is a backdoor flush out there. Yes, there is a full house out there. But when the low jack chooses this size, I don't think he has those hands ever, any of the time. And if I was bluffing in the spot and he flipped over a hand like jack 10 or king jack or something like that, would I feel comfortable choosing a large size to bluff to get that hand to fold? Well, maybe, but I'd probably have to go absolutely huge here. You know, maybe like 600, 700, something like that. So I don't think he's folding even to a reasonable size here. So I'm gonna get greedy with it. I go 380, raising something like 4.55x here. Now the big blind's going to cold call. The low jack folds, and the big blind shows the jack of diamonds and claims to have had ace jack. So we get some nice little value here on the river. All right, next hand here, double board PLO bum pot. Also, big pot alert. I feel like we can use that one legit now. So 8-handed here, we've got queen 9, 4, 3 with all of the diamonds in the deck of cards. Flop 1 comes jack 10, 3, so we are open-ended. Board deuce comes ace, queen, queen, so we flop trips. We are going to check our entire range from early position. EP goes 120. Now the small blind calls. And at this point with 2 players in there, a little precarious to raise because it's, you know, it's conceivable that one of these guys has like pocket jacks or pocket 10s and the other one has a queen with a better kicker or pocket aces or something like that. So we could, it's possible if we just pile in the money here, like we could just be getting scooped. So when we don't have lockdown on one board, I am just calling here. So that's what I like to do. Turn is now a 4 of hearts up top and an ace down below. We don't love this. So small blind checks, we check, and now fortunately for us, the EP player checks it back. 8 of hearts up top and a deuce of diamonds down below. So we make the nut straight up top, and we've got trip queens on the second board. Now the small blind is going to check. At this point, we've got a very strong hand. I think it's unlikely that the EP player has a full house like ace queen because he would just bet that. He would just continue betting that on the turn. So I think it's pretty likely that the EP player has a hand like king queen or something like that that's slowed down on the turn. The small blind player is tricky, but I do think he could have some strong hands on the top board. Maybe hands like pocket 10s or jack 10 or pocket 3s or something like that. So I think by just potting here, maybe we can get the EP player to fold out a queen and the small blind to call with a set or 2 pair on the top board. So that's the plan. I go 450, EP folds, and now the small blind moves all in for approximately $1,900. Now, this sucks. It's not great. I'm not real good at the math here, but the worst case scenario is we get quartered here by a hand like ace, queen, 9. And I do expect to get quartered here a good percentage of the time, but we're calling 1450 to get back like 1100 or something like that. So even if we're just like chopping like some percentage of the time, this is gonna be a profitable call. I'm revealing it right now. I'm not actually good at PLO double board bomb pots. I've been scamming you guys this whole time. So I don't know, I put in the call. Small blind shows queen, 9, 7, 5. So we are actually going to chop it up with the small blind here, thank God. And that will wrap up the second session. All right, guys, you're not gonna believe this, but we did it. We finally booked a win. Played about 7 hours, won about $1,500, and at this point, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to thank everybody who made this possible. The fans, the supporters, the coaches, the people in the locker room, everybody who helped this come to fruition to win a poker session. Thank you, guys.